So right now I'm showing you some examples of blobjects, or blob objects, which were sort of a cultural phenomenon that really formed the precursor to this much more modern or contemporary architectural movement that we're going to be talking about this week, and that is blobitecture. So blobitecture, or blob-inspired architecture, these are buildings that curve and bulge. They're curvilinear. They're kind of like amoeba. And they're an interesting mix in that sense of both modern, they have a very contemporary look, but also a very organic look. And actually that organic aspect of blobitecture was an attempt to return architecture to some of the forms that we typically experience in nature. So if you think about it, the way modern architecture is, particularly kind of the standard box-shaped buildings, straight lines, lots of corners, we very rarely see objects in nature that actually have these box-like rectilinear shapes. So blobitecture was basically attempting to try to move away from this kind of prefabricated box architectural style that was so common and pervasive, and to try to return to this aesthetic where buildings reflect shapes that we see in nature. So much more curved, much more amorphous, but they really belie this natural, organic aesthetic by relying almost exclusively on CAD and similar types of software programs for design purposes. So these software programs use these mathematical expressions. There's a lot of multivariable calculus involved here because these buildings are so multidimensional, to sort of manipulate these designs to create the final product. So for a blob purist, actually, blobitecture has to refer only to buildings that were built solely on the basis of these computerized manipulations, not from the construction of any physically built model. So like what we were just looking at, the Experience Music Project in Seattle, and now the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, since these buildings were built using physically constructed models and not just from computer manipulations, in the strictest sense, right, we might not actually be able to consider these buildings examples of blobitecture. And I should also mention that the term blobitecture actually originally emerged as a derogatory term, and then much like the word impressionist, sort of stuck and became associated with this particular design style. So the last thing we're going to do here is, this is my last architectural example from the University of Michigan. This is the Biomedical Sciences Research Building, which I think is technically part of the medical school. This was built in 2006 and designed by the architect James Stewart Polshek. And you can see how this maybe isn't the best example of blobitecture, but you can see how the facade of this building reflects that kind of amoeboid shape. It curves and bulges, and in that sense is a little bit more organic, and it gives it a very kind of modern aesthetic. And we'll go inside here, and you can see there's definitely a focus on lighting here and openness, and that seems to be a pretty popular trend in academic buildings, is this emphasis on an interior design that is supportive of collaboration, particularly in a laboratory like this, where you can imagine there's probably a lot of collaboration amongst scientists. And then in the front of the building there, you can see that it's actually I think an auditorium. It has a similar kind of blobitecture type shape that reflects the facade of the building. If we were to go around to the back, you'd actually see that it's much more box-like. So in this sense, in 2006, blobitecture was something that kind of began, I think, in the 60s, and then grew into sort of a sub-movement of Deconstructivism, which is a different architectural style. So this building is much more modern, but you can see how it was definitely influenced by the ideas that maybe were originally manifested in blobitecture, in terms of the curving and the kind of wavy designs that we see here.